Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the HR Huddle. I'm your host, Teri Zipper, CEO and Managing Partner at Sapient Insights Group. And I'm back for another exciting episode of HR We Have a Problem. This is the show where we break down the big and most relevant issues of the day. We help you make sense of what they mean for you, and we talk about what you might do about them. This is a special episode of HR We Have a Problem, and joining me today is Sherry Yarbrough, Payroll Product Manager at Workday, and my partner and the host of Spilling the Tea on HR Tech, Stacey Harris. Welcome, Sherry and Stacey.
Thank you.
Yeah, looking forward to having the conversation, Teri.
I know the two of you just did a webinar together and had a pretty in-depth conversation about what it really takes to achieve results through outcome-focused approaches to HR. I think that's something we underestimate the importance of in terms of HR in business outcomes and how HR can deliver on things that support the business outcomes. Even some of the most mundane and compliance-related HR activities like payroll have a big impact on business outcomes. So I was hoping that's what we could talk about today. Does that sound like a good plan to you?
Sounds like a plan.
I think we're going to have a lot to talk about. Sherry's one of the most well-known experts in payroll that you're going to find, Teri.
Excellent. Then let's get into the huddle. So payroll and HR activities, we know they can be operational, they can be transactional, they solve for compliance, but payroll is not typically viewed as strategic. Sherry, I've been thinking about this and this is a very short-sighted view, in my opinion. I mean, if payroll is mishandled or we don't pay attention to some of the warning signs in the payroll data, it can be a disaster. So talk a little bit about why this view is so short-sighted.
Yeah, that's a great question and a great thought. I think when we talk about payroll in general, there's that understanding that payroll is just this big easy button and you just push the button and it just happens. Right?
That
This
would be
magically
great.
happens. God, wouldn't it be great if it happened like that? And unfortunately, it doesn't in the world. The last couple of years have been really stressful in the space of payroll, right? With COVID happening. And then we had this whole concept of great resignation. We had this renewed focus on equity that was coming out, as well as this current space that we're in today with this economic uncertainty. And I think through all of that, payroll in and of itself, we had to keep going, right? And you hit on it just a little bit, but I got a brief, quick story for you. I used to manage payroll way back when, and there was this hurricane that was hitting in the Gulf Coast, and it was Katrina. It was back in 2005. And I had folks down there that were actually running payroll for some plants that were working down there. And of course, it was happening during payroll week, right? When you need to get stuff done. Those folks drove for an hour and a half north to get away from the Gulf Coast to be able to sit at some diner, something, to be able to actually transmit data. So the thing you need to know about payroll people is that payroll people are extremely understanding of the impact of their role. And if they don't do payroll right, if they are not accurate, on time, compliant every single time, they could impact just somebody putting gas in their car, not able to get to work, impact getting diapers or formula. And so we are, and I say we because I used to manage payroll, we are extremely dedicated to making sure this works. And what this means then is when that data that comes out of pay is available, it's like that golden nugget because it's as accurate or as right as it could possibly be, because we take such great pride in making sure that they can put gas in the truck or that diapers can get on the baby. And so why is it not strategic? Because the thought is that it's this easy button. And in a lot of cases, that data, that's that golden nugget, isn't necessarily used or visible to the folks that need it.
Yeah, absolutely true. I'm actually in New Orleans this week, so that really struck a chord with me when you said that. And I think about the lengths that the payroll teams go to make sure payroll happens. It's pretty phenomenal.
It is. Yeah, I've been in a lot of those types of situations, and it's extremely dedicated because they know that they have an impact each and every payday, right? Whether it's weekly, biweekly, monthly, semi-monthly, whatever that looks like. They are like that mouse on the wheel, right? They never get off. They just keep going. So yeah, they're definitely dedicated to their craft.
Yeah, the unsung heroes of HR. I think that if anybody's really looking at where the hidden heroes are in this market, payroll is definitely one of them, right?
Well,
Yeah.
I think so.
So Sherry, you talked a little bit about how short-sighted of you that is to think that payroll is not strategic. I mean, we all know there's a lot of transactional details to it, but what do you see as some of the steps that HR and payroll functions can take to elevate the role of from an HR perspective and help them to be viewed more as a strategic partner?
Sure. I think there's a lot I could say in this space. So in the essence of not going on and long-winded, I think one of the hardest things for folks in payroll HR is to helicopter above the storm that they're currently in, right? And take a look outward and see what's going on around them, not only within their work group, but within their organization. And when you're able to do that, you're really looking to engage and empower the workforce, right? Because we all know that happy and engaged workers, right? They're happier to come to work. They're more engaged. They produce more. The morale is higher, and just coming to work is a happier place to be, right? So when you take a look and you do that, the question then becomes, okay, well, how do I help my organization get to that space, right? And it comes down to, in my world, it comes down to kind of a couple different areas, right? It's that understanding what the workers are looking for. They're looking for data, and not necessarily everybody's data. They want their data. They want their employee self-service function, right? They want that one-stop shop where they can go, that benefits and payroll type hub where they can go. And if they're having a baby or they are getting married, they can go in and make those changes to those benefit elections. Or maybe they want to know, what is it that's going to be, what's my net pay going to be if I change my 401k from 6% to 7%? What's that going to do? What's that impact on me as an individual? Maybe I want to know what it's going to be if I move jobs, right? And so I'm getting taxed in California versus Louisiana, right? What's that going to look like? What's that impact on me going to be? What's my equity look like? So if they have that one-stop shop where you can empower your workforce to be able to just go to one place instead of knowing all these other places, that's huge. The other thing that in that space, I also think a big manager self-service, right? How do we empower managers? It's one thing that we empower the workforce, but the managers also need to be empowered. And this is where that data comes into play, right? It's not only for the workers themselves, but it's also for the managers. How you look at that manager dashboard. So yes, I've run payroll. Now I've got my costs, and I can see that my costs, oh gosh, I have so much more overtime in plant A versus plant B. Why do I have that? Now you can go down in workforce planning and you can see that, gosh, I have 5 different job recs open and wow, I need to fill those because then I can help support or maintain my overtime. So having that capability with self-service, right? And when you look across the technology platform that you're sitting on, if you're not utilizing that, right, that's a first step. Bots, right? Using bots to do whatever they're going to do. Notifications. One of the things that in payroll we always see is late time cards. But if you enable the dashboards at the manager level to say, hey, you know what? I can see that half of my team has submitted time, half the team hasn't. Maybe I send a notification to the team that hasn't. Maybe I approve the time that's there. So you start to empower the managers to help reduce the costs on the back end. So again, it's using that technology to reduce costs on the back end to help them maintain and make decisions right now on the front end.
Yeah, I like that. Stacey, we were talking a little bit about just what were some of the things that could help elevate the role, right? And one of the big ones that Sherry hit on was empowering managers. And then the data associated with being able to have conversations and be knowledgeable about what's happening and just understand the big picture, right? Do you have any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the idea of empowering the manager, whether that's a payroll manager or HR manager working with the payroll manager, right? I think or the person out in the field who's the manager who's sort of working with payroll to get things right. Like in all cases, managers have so much opportunity to change how things are being done inside the organization to create culture or to change culture inside the organization. And so I think one of the things that we find over and over again is that the more data with guidance on how to use that data that you give to managers, the better off organizations are. Time and time again, our data shows that rolling data out throughout the organization to more than just the executives, to more than just the HR business partners, but rolling it out to all levels within the organization at some point and providing guidance on how that data should be read is a real tool that allows people to, just like any other sort of metric, allows you to make some adjustments to what you're doing, to how you're working with your employees. We're big proponents too of employees understanding the data, right? I think one of the things that you were just talking about was punch card times and late and people sort of clocking in late and what that does to an organization. Sometimes employees giving them an understanding of how all those systems work is just as important as just saying, be on time. We need you to be on time. Well, if they don't understand how that might be impacting maybe the payroll process or the paycheck timing or whatever they're doing, right? It's hard sometimes to make adjustments if you don't understand the upstream impact of your actions and what that data is doing for employees. So yeah, I'm a big proponent of data across the organization.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that one of the things that what I've seen historically that's been very demoralizing is they're working, you're trying to get that time card in, and it doesn't get approved in time. And ultimately, the worker ends up feeling the pain of it, right? Because now, where they thought they were going to have a direct deposit for their pay, they're now getting a manual check that, yes, may not be as timely as a direct deposit is. And now they have to wait for that check to clear a bank, even though you can take a picture of it. At the same time, yeah, it just has such an impact on the overall morale and really understanding both manager and worker with that data and how they use it and the impact of it or not doing it is huge.
Yeah. Payroll, I mean, they're really on the front line, right? They're on the front line, making sure that we're acting responsibly, that we're doing things ethically, that we're operating within all the government regulations that we have to deal with, right? I mean, it's big. I mean, compliance is important, but there's this disconnect between the compliance conversation and strategic HR and payroll. And I'm wondering, what you think that the gap is? Like, how do we close that gap of why is it so hard to operationally do things and be compliant while at the same time leading strategically?
Yeah, I think, Stacey, I'm going to jump in here. I think that in a lot of cases, it's just not knowing, right? I walked into a job one time and I was there day one and I started on January 31st. And I had somebody come ask me a question. I'm not going to get into the specifics, but I had somebody come ask me a question and I said, oh no, this company doesn't have that. We were a large company and they were asking me about a small company type of item related to pay. And I went to the vice president and I said, look, I'm going to have to do X number of W-2Cs because this was on the W-2s and that's incorrect. And the question I got, which kind of befuddled me, was, well, why do you have to change it? So sometimes there's just not an understanding of, yeah, you can't have that box, that letter, that amount on a W-2 if you're not supposed to have it. And so sometimes there's just not an understanding. And this is where the data really takes off, is that you can take this data and you can help tell the story. And that's what's so important about having this data. And organizations are different all over the place, but you can really take this data, look across an individual organization, identify the pieces that are pertinent, and then go ahead and use that data to tell your story. And so I honestly think that sometimes people just don't know what they don't know, and we have to help them understand, and the data can help tell that story.
Yeah. And I would add to that, because I think, Sherry, you're right on with this fact of the education process that the data gives, particularly in payroll, right? But across HR. But I think the other piece that it's sometimes particularly in HR, but definitely in the payroll function, it's oftentimes hard to ask for help too, right? And the one thing that I find that difference, when you were asking, like, what makes that difference between sort of the being viewed as strategic versus sort of getting the job done, right? Mm-hmm. One of the things that our data was clear about, whether you were a small organization or a large organization, is that as a payroll function, you had some sort of help in your HR approach, right? Whether that was advisory services, consulting, whether you had made the decision to outsource some elements of your function. The idea is that realizing that when you're too busy because you're doing all of the everyday business to be able to do exactly what you just said, Sherry, to look across and say, oh, we've got an issue and we need to address it. And I need to go to the executive and have that conversation. If you're too busy just doing day-to-day work, you're never going to be able to get to that level. And so you do have to take a step back and say, I need to either get help so that I can figure out how to do this more efficiently, get help so I can outsource some of these elements and figure out what that cost is and how that will save me. And I know that sometimes is a little bit of a daunting exercise, but I think, Teri, when we talk to a lot of organizations who have been able to take the step forward to move out of what we would see in our data set as a compliance-driven function, they've oftentimes, the first step has been understanding what they needed to outsource or understanding what they needed to automate or needing to understand what they needed to do to basically create more time in their day. That would be a big thing I think they really have to look at.
I think you're spot on, Stacey.
Yeah,
I do. I think when you can't do it yourself, you have to be willing to ask. Yep.
Yeah.
Another area that I was thinking about was labor and workforce planning. I mean, it's something that every organization has to do, no matter how big or small they are. And most of the time, they're so focused on filling a role, haven't really thought too much about the actual position and skills needed. But how can HR and payroll data play a role in this process? Because, I mean, it's a critical process. And I think it's an area where sometimes the payroll piece may be missing. And having that there could really start to help elevate the way that people think about payroll.
Yeah, maybe I'll answer this, and I'd love to get Sherry to maybe give, because I think there's some real life examples on this one, Teri. The workforce planning and the labor planning, right, I think is oftentimes driven by a recruiting number, how many open roles we have, right? Like I've lost this person, I've got 5 people I need to hire, right? And the thing about payroll data is it gives you the forward-looking conversation. When you start to see a lot of absences or leaves, or you start to see a lot of overtime charges, right? That's when you start to realize that's actually a forward-looking metric for doing my workforce planning that most organizations overlook. And I think that's the piece where when you're being strategic, you have to not just look behind you at what you need from a workforce planning perspective, but ahead of you what you need for a workforce planning perspective. And to me, particularly payroll data, also workforce management data are the two things that are going to give you that piece. And Sherry, you and I talked about this. There's some great examples of this, I think, in the market, right?
Yeah, Stacey, there are a lot of examples, whether it's, I mentioned earlier, that concept of seeing overtime and why you have overtime in different areas and how you can then dig into the causes for that overtime. And it could be people, it could be process, it could be many other things. But if you fix those going forward, you're able to have that understanding of costs that may come down the road in the future. So you're spot on in terms of using the data today to be able to forecast for the future. And that's across the board with all the different data that comes out of pay.
Yeah, that's a good point. I just looking at some data myself recently of a group within an organization, a group of nurses in particular, and who had regularly had a significant amount of overtime. So there's a big question there of, do they need to expand their staff? Are they working overtime because they get paid for overtime? Are they understaffed? And basically, we need to look at the whole model, like what's the real problem there? And that's huge from a workforce perspective. Should these people be working these numbers of hours over this period of time, or do we have a different problem to solve?
Right. I mean, it could be the fact that you have so much overtime because they haven't skilled up some of the other workers to be able to do some of those other roles. Now, I'm not sure in healthcare that would be the case, but there are cases where you only have a couple of workers within your organization to be able to do that. And so you really can then get down to the root cause of why these overtime pieces are standing out and, how you can make change to impact the bottom line. I don't know of an executive, if you say that you can save some costs, if you do something that they're going to go, no, don't do that.
Yeah.
So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think this also brings in some real need to also sometimes look at the model you put in place for the organization. I think that's where you're heading, Terry, too. Like, do we need some contingent workers so we could scale up and scale down, right, in that area? And again, payroll has the opportunity to look forward at that. And I think, again, most organizations don't connect those dots between what we're seeing in payroll and our need for contingent workforce, right? Until it's too late, until the system starts to crack and employees either are disgruntled or frustrated. And that's not when you want to be making those decisions, right?
That's absolutely right. The need to be able to forecast the data going forward, right? And I mean, payroll data is payroll data. You can look year over year and you can see the trends, right? It's not something that you can't not forecast, right? So you can look and you can see that year over year, this is kind of the place that I have it and the why, and you're able to actually make change or supplement, as you mentioned, to be able to get what you need, because it typically doesn't, year over year, there's not a lot of change, especially if you're more of that manufacturing type of place. You know what you're getting on an annual basis and output and throughput, whatnot.
Yeah. How often does somebody ask you for a payroll trend report? I'm curious.
All the time. Right?
The question is, what are they doing with it at that point, right? There's some serious decisions that could be made.
Right. And the question is, what are you looking for? And half the time, they're not even sure what they're looking for.
Yeah.
Right? They're just wanting information. And I think that's another piece of it, right? It's giving access to information that, and I think, Stacey, you hit on it earlier, access to the information, but then showing how you can use that information, because they're looking for it now. And years ago, you got the data at the end of the month or at the beginning of the next month. And now with the data the way it is, it's pretty, once it's there and you can get access to it, it's just a matter of understanding how to use it and how to interpret it.
Well, I think from an interpretation perspective, I'm wondering what the use of generative AI is going to be in terms of really helping us understand what that future look is and sort of tease out more future trending information that we might gather otherwise by just the human eyes looking at it. Do you have any thoughts on that, or have you started to see that happen within your purview?
I'm excited about it. It's kind of funny. I'm excited about it because within payroll, we spend, all roads lead to payroll. Everything comes into pay, and it's just up to pay to figure out if the data is right or not. And so we spend our lives in pivot tables and VLOOKUPs and dumping data here and pushing it there. And does this look right? Does that look right? Is that about what it was this time last year? Is that what it was? Yeah. So there's all this analysis that goes on. And wouldn't it be great if you got to that point where the system was smart enough to know that, you know what, that was the golden nugget that you needed to know about. Let me just make that piece of information available to you so that you're not having to do all this additional work. And every organization within, now we all know that pay is pay across the organizations, right? Across the country, pay is pay. But every organization is slightly different in the policies and the practices and the pieces of procedures that they have in place. And so I think that when you look at pay in general and you say, okay, pay is pay, within this organization, I want to be able to give me everybody that is missing 8 hours of data. Give me everybody over here that is $50 more than what they were last paycheck. If you can surface those to the top, as opposed to making me find them, sign me up, because I'm there.
I'm laughing, Sherry, because I'm like, first of all, your job description fits a data analyst on the research side perfectly. So I think there's some crossovers there that we'll probably all need to be talking a little bit about. But the artificial intelligence, there's a lot of opportunity there when it comes to this kind of data. I think that most organizations can see. I do think there's a bit of fear in the market, though, because the tools right now are still, we're not sure where that data is going to end up, right? So like you really want a closed system, particularly with your payroll data, because it is very sensitive information inside your organization and does give, in the right hands, a lot of view into where your company is at and what they're doing and how they're functioning. And so I think the most important thing when we're talking about artificial intelligence and automation and the ability to sort of surface that kind of information is to trust where that data is going to go and how it's going to be used. And so we're hearing a lot of conversation about closed and open systems, right? And those that are open to the market, feeding the large language models versus those that are still doing large language models, but maybe inside of a system that's got more doors and locks and keys on it. And I think that's probably going to be the opportunity for this area, is to just know where that artificial intelligence is running from and where they're getting their data from.
Right. And I think at least within Workday, I think the part that's nice is that it's tenanted. And so it's maintained within the tenant of itself. And so that data, when you start to analyze what it is you need, you're only looking at your data. So it's not something that's going out into the world. That's a big point. I heard this great quote when I was at a conference, and it was basically talking to the payroll professionals that were out there. And it was basically saying, I'm never going to get it right, but the essence of it was, don't be afraid of AI taking your job or machine learning taking your job, right? Be afraid of the person who's using the technology in AI and ML, because they'll take your job. So that concept, right, of using the technology, being careful with the technology. But yeah, I thought that was telling.
Really good one.
I love that. Yeah. Stacey, we did a lot of analysis around strategic HR in our survey last year and looked at the compliance-driven organizations and then what organizations that were viewed as strategic, what they were doing differently from a reporting perspective, going beyond those sort of compliance reports and providing other information. I don't know that payroll was like specifically, or compensation data was on that list, but I could see, just talking about this AI piece of it, the kinds of information about payroll that we could gather, how that could become a very key metric or piece of data that's provided to executives on a regular basis, and really start to amp the value here.
No, without a doubt, so when you look at a couple of the things that really bubbled to the top, some of the things that we've all been talking about for a long time, like change management, which is helping your company become more adaptable, right? And things like skills management, which I think we've been talking about for some time, as well as the areas around understanding processes like absence and leave, which touch everybody in your organization, right? But one of the big ones that came out was that workforce planning one that you had mentioned earlier, Teri, which is organizations who conducted workforce planning saw better business outcomes. But most importantly was that it wasn't just that you conducted workforce planning, but that you conducted it using position management. And I think that gets back to this payroll conversation, because position management is the idea underlying basically of not just hiring a role or a person, but hiring for the levels and the number of people you need in a specific position, right? And so it's very skills focused and it's very data focused as to how you would hire that position and how you would hold that position open so you have payroll dollars set aside for it, right? It's this idea that you are budgeting your company as if it is fully staffed. And then if you don't have that staff in place, how do you manage to take that payroll and use it in different ways, right? So that you are not losing the productivity of your company because you are missing people, which is a really big issue in our market today, right? Because when you are missing people, it's quite often in a market when you have a skills gap. And so to me, I think the idea of understanding that payroll isn't just I'm using it's great, payroll's less this week because I have fewer employees. Well, that might mean your productivity is down as well, right? Because you don't have employees in the roles you need.
Yeah.
And so to me, I think it's tightly connected, and the data around this is tightly connected to being a strategic HR function. And so business leaders have to know how to read that data, and they have to understand that the things they're looking at, every executive is going to tell you, look at all the surveys these days, right? And executives say, talent is my biggest worry, not having the right people. Well, what you should really be worried about is not running your company effectively because you don't have those people, right? Nobody has all the people they need. We all know that's the issue. So how do you run it still effectively without it? And I don't know, Sherry, if that rings true to you as well, because position management seems like one of those terms that only HR geeks know, right?
It is. And within the payroll world, you're always asked to do more with less. And it's a matter of, it's a daily prioritization, and that's how you get through it. But when you start going more strategic, you have to be looking beyond that. You have to be looking at what your organization's going to be. What am I going to need as I know I'm getting ready to roll into the end of the year? I know I'm tight right now. What do I need when I get there? And how do I budget my dollars accordingly to do that? Yeah, it happens in payroll all the time.
So we've talked a lot about data. We've talked about empowering managers, which I love. That's one of my pet peeves, I think, is we don't empower managers enough. We've talked about looking outward and sort of rising above sort of the compliance piece to really understand where we can actually have impacts, right? We've talked about workforce planning and how some of that can work. Sherry, is there one thing that you can give people? One of the things I like to do coming out of my podcast is, what's one thing that we could tell people, hey, start doing this, start thinking about this, start considering this, put this on your to-do list, and this will help start to move the needle for you in terms of how you and your organization look at payroll in the future? Is there a place that you can tell people to start? Like, here's something that if you can start to do this, you can start to get on the path. We'll give you more information later, but I love it when somebody tells me I can do something. I can start doing it today. Like, what is it?
Yeah,
it's not the magic button. We know we don't.
Yeah, I go back to what you can do today. And it's what you can do today is your organization, right? And what you can do today is you can use the data. It's there. You just have to get to it, which sometimes isn't the easiest, but you can get to it. Use the data to tell your story and support your workers. And I think that's something that you have power and control over to be able to do.
Yeah, I like that. Power and control. We all want that. Stacey, would you add anything?
Yeah, I think this conversation has really highlighted for me that one of the things I think, particularly in payroll, but really in any role in HR, a good exercise to maybe go through on, if not a daily basis, maybe once a month or so, is looking at the work that's on your plate and starting to look at what could be offloaded to either another resource, an outsource, or automated, right? And then what really has to stay in your purview. And I think, because the one thing I hear time and time again is that I just have too much on my plate. And so I think we should go through a regular exercise of what could I start to sort of shift to other ways of getting that work done. So I would have the time to do exactly what Sherry's talking about if I don't have the time today. And so to me, that's something you could do tomorrow. Spend an hour and look at your workload and just start that list. Because once you have that list in mind, then you can start to look for either other people in the organization who might be able to do it, either automated tools that might be able to handle it. But until you do that list, you don't know what you could be doing. So,
yeah. Well, Sherry and Stacey, I want to thank you guys for joining me today. This has been a great conversation. I know that I talked a little bit about it up front. There's a webinar that you guys did recently, and there's also a white paper that's coming out on this topic as well. So if you want to learn more, dive into this a little bit further, that'll be coming soon. And we will either put that in the show notes or we will put it in the social when it comes out so we can share those links with you and give you guys some other places where you can go to get more information. We're super excited about that. So I want to thank you guys. I want to thank our producers, Brand Method Media Group, and our marketing team. And of course, you. Thank you for tuning in. That is all the time we have for today's episode of HR We Have a Problem. If you enjoyed this episode, you can subscribe to it on your favorite podcast app. Leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to leave us a topic, we'd love to hear that too. You can drop us a line or schedule a chat on our website. We will be back in 2 weeks with another episode of HR We Have a Problem. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Great. Thank you.